Very good afternoon to you on this lovely June afternoon. What are we talking about today? The zone system. It's something that's quite simple to do, but very potentially complicated to talk about. And I'm just gonna go at it unscripted. No auto cue. I've made a couple of notes, or I've pulled off a couple of quotes rather, that the great man Ansel Adams mentioned, and look, we're just going to go straight into it and see where we come out. Come along with me. Hopefully, this will throw a little bit more light, pardon the pun, on the subject. Ostensibly, it is very simple. I, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people have simplified it, or it's even a little controversial at times. And I think I understand exactly why it's controversial. And that's partly why it's complicated to talk about, because there are so many other things that it can lead into that can affect the zone system. And so I think a lot of people sort of end up headbutting a wall and not being able to implement it properly, not realizing that they're doing certain things that affect the outcome. I've heard that a lot. But when I was starting out in photography, I assisted. And I remember the first photographer I assisted, I hadn't even touched his kit or done anything yet. I was, being very, very tentative and cautious and what have you. And he came to me and said, "Okay, Hasselblad, if it ain't working, it's not the camera, it's you. So don't force anything." And in the same way, the zone system does work. It's tried and tested, and it's extremely good, and it's incredibly helpful. I'm just going to straighten that a little bit. I think it's... and it's incredibly helpful. However, there is room for... There's quite a lot of room for interpretation and mistakes. Now, interpretation is a key factor, because I will say right from the off, you can't talk about the zone system without talking about a spot meter and something called, this is an Ansel Adams thing as well, pre-visualization. They go hand in hand together. If you want to miss one of those out or not regard one of those things, then it can cause a lot of trouble further down the line. To understand it, I will say again straight off, don't listen to me, don't listen to anybody else. Go to the source, and that's Ansel Adams himself. He wrote 3 books, 1, 2, and 3, the camera, the negative, and the print. They're Bibles. They're still in print today. I don't know when they came out, to be honest. I think 90s, maybe. I'm not too sure. But he himself, Ansel Adams, was... well, yeah, I was going to talk about when he was born, but look, we'll leave all that stuff. We're going to be here forever. But he invented the zone system, along with somebody else. I forget his name now. Archer, I think his name was. Archer rings a bell for some reason, but they were in collaboration, okay? Ansel Adams, for me, is, and a lot of, or many, many great photographers, is regarded as the master technician, craftsman, executioner of brilliance. If you get the opportunity to see his prints firsthand, you will be blown away by them. They are, in a way, they don't relate very well to the internet. I've pulled off some examples here just to give you a flavour, but they do not do the images justice in any way, shape or form. It's almost as though there are too many tones for the internet to be able to deal with, or something. I don't know what it is. But do go along. When I started college, we were told to read these before we started. With these 3 books I mentioned. And I thought, landscape photography, look, call me a Philistine. I've never been that interested in landscape photography per se. Now, look, Ansel Adams photographed much of his time in the Yosemite Valley. And look, it is stunning. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet, I would imagine. I would love to go there. I would love to just, stroll around for weeks and months and just take it all in. It would be the trip of a lifetime. Do I want to lug 20 kilograms of kit around with me? Not in a million years. I mean, I might take some snaps, for sure. I absolutely would. But to do what Ansel Adams did, no way. For me, landscape photography, or somewhere as amazing as that, it's like, well, I can't better that. That's as good as it gets. Seeing it with the naked eye, trying to photograph it, it's just like, I don't know. Why sort of photograph something that is already amazing? And do you get any points for, just because you do it extremely well? I don't know. For me, look, it takes all sorts. And yes, maybe I am a Philistine, but for me, it's about seeing this amazingness, this wonder, this wonderment of nature in all its glory. For me, it doesn't make me want to photograph it. I have to photograph people. That's kind of what stirs me. And this is a very important thing. One of his quotes that I've pulled off, the zone system, a system to map the various tonal regions of luminance of objects in any given scene to enable the photographer to reach the optimal exposure during the capture of the image. Okay, yeah, yada yada. We'll investigate that, and we'll sort of understand that maybe a little bit better if it's not completely obvious. It is to me, but it sounds a little bit, whatever. The other thing he said in terms of visualization, I'm just going to read it straight off. In my mind's eye, I visualize how a particular sight and feeling will appear on a print. Sight and feeling will appear on a print. If it excites me, there is a good chance it will make a good photograph. If it excites me. Underline. Look it up. Keywords here. It is an intuitive sense, an ability that comes from a lot of practice. For sure. But the key thing for me, so in terms of visualization or pre-visualization, remember those 2 things, the spot meter, pre-visualization, and the zone system. For me, it's about, initially what excites you. Just recognize it. If you're not interested in landscapes, but you're interested in, like me, people and street photography, then recognize that. There's no point in fighting that. Maybe I'll change as I get older. Maybe landscapes will become, I'll never photograph another person again. It'll all be about mountains and rivers and streams and all that kind of stuff. But I think for the purposes of this, for the purposes of the zone system, although it can be applied and used and is used, and if you've used Photoshop or Lightroom, you have, to some extent, maybe unwittingly, delved into the zone system without realizing it. You have looked at tones. You have evaluated tones in terms of what you want to be light, what you want to be dark. And that, in a nutshell, is basically what the zone system is. It's a way, but it goes a step further, and it shows you how to look at something and see something with that pre-visualization, how do you want that image to look? What film are you using? I don't want to get too complicated just yet. I will finish off with some variances and what have you, which you can switch off if it's overcomplicating things. But that initial thing, before you even think about the zone system, is that pre-visualization. Where are you going to put the camera? How high is it going to be on the tripod if you're using a tripod? Are you in the optimal place? Is the light right? Light is everything. So, we know it comes up in the east and sets in the west. Where is it moving? What's the optimum time? These are things that Ansel Adams considered all the time. Maybe you'd wait an hour for the right set of cloud to come across or whatever, But he is pre-visualizing, and he has all these, he's photographing in black and white, normally 5:4, sometimes Hasselblad, medium format. But he's gotten to this place where he knows he wants to be, and he's looking at the light and seeing what's happening. Is it a clear day? Are there clouds coming in? Where is the light coming? And then, what we have is probably, as with most landscapes, the sky is an area that needs to be catered for. We need to understand those values, but we're not even doing that yet. We're just pre-visualizing, and we're evaluating the dark shadow areas. How dark are they? What are the midtones? What are the highlights? What are the bits that go to white? And for me, whenever I do this, whenever I'm visualizing or pre-visualizing, and then beginning to use the zone scale, the zone system, I sometimes just squint, because that gives you a really good indication. It sort of shuts out extraneous light somehow, and it just reduces things down quite simply. And I think it also mimics how sensitive most film is, in actual fact. When you look at a scene, a real life scene, not a print, but a real life scene, a beautiful landscape somewhere, your eye and your brain is far more sensitive than any piece of film. It can evaluate all sorts of things that film can't. Film is, 10 layers, 11 layers of stops, if you like, or increments. And it can, it's quite intelligent, but it's got limitations. And other films will have even more limitations. So it's about knowing your materials, like an artist. What will an oil do as opposed to a pastel or a charcoal or whatever? What are the limitations? What are you trying to convey? It's all part of the pre-visualizing of an image. And more than that, there is something else I want to talk about a little bit later, where pre-visualization is coming. It's almost more important than the zone system, because I don't think you can use a zone system unless you know where you want your values to fall. So, for example, let's say we've got one of Ansel Adams' beautiful, Yosemite Valley scenes. And let's say a third of that image is sky. Maybe there's cloud, maybe there isn't, but there's sky. Some light has cascaded round, so we've got some nice light. But we know immediately that the sky is going to be the highlight, probably. Unless there's snow, like in some of his pictures. The sky is normally, in most landscape photographs, a big consideration for a photographer, because that can blow very quickly, very easily. That can easily be overexposed and go to white and look wrong. If something's just bleached out completely, there's no detail in there, trust me, you've probably seen examples of it. It looks awful, according to me, and according to, I think, most people. But it is only according to me. I can say that point blank, unambiguously. I don't want to see a big block, a third of a photograph of bleached out white. Okay? So that's one of my values. I have to recognize that. I like to see detail in skies, especially if it's a sunset and you get all those beautiful pinks and oranges and God knows what else going on. Yeah, it can be sumptuous. If I send that to white, you know, okay, if I'm taking a black and white photograph, then they're not going to be pinks and oranges, I hear you say. Yeah, absolutely. But I don't want it to go to white. I don't, I want some of that detail in because it's an integral part of the photo. It's a third of the photograph. If we're dealing with the rule of thirds, let's just say it is a third of the image, the top third, the top tier, if you like. I've got to be mindful of that. I've also got to be mindful of the shadows, because if I expose purely for the white sky, or the light sky, let's call it, because it's not white, it can go white easily. I can make it look white, no problem. But if I expose for the sky, the shadow areas are going to suffer. So maybe there's some trade-off to be done here. How important are those shadow areas? If it's a sunset, then really there's not an awful lot of detail in the shadow areas because it's probably silhouetted a little bit. And so that's an integral part of that photograph. We're not expecting to see loads of information. So we need to assess what is important to us. How do we want that image to look? And then there's a second stage. We've parked the tripod, we've leveled off the camera, we've decided, we're going to take a photograph of this, and it mildly interests us and what have you. Does it mildly interest us, or does it really excite us? What are we connecting to in that image? Why? Is it just because it's better than most other places we've walked around? Is it because we're tired carrying 20 kilograms of kit with us and we just need a rest? Or is there something that's really emotionally connecting with us? And that is key. That's part of what Ansel Adams is saying here. You can easily overlook the importance of what he's saying, but he says it, and it follows through into his images. If it excites me. Now, exciting isn't a word you use. Well, excites. That's quite a powerful word. What are you connecting with? Is it the beautiful kind of, cotton wool-like clouds? Is it the storm clouds? Is it the river off in the distance? The Snake River, meandering down the valley? Is it the granite rock? What is it that's really, causing us to take that intake of breath? Why are we excited by that? What are you connecting to? It's not rocket science. It's either is or it isn't. Maybe you don't feel excited about anything. I don't know. I get excited about things. Street photography, I get excited all the time by things, but they're quick things. They're not things I can, put my camera on a tripod and consider things and what have you. I can still apply the zone system to street photography. I just have to do it in a slightly different way. And in all honesty, I don't use it very much, but it informs me all the time. It informs me about how I should be thinking. My style of street photography doesn't lend it because it's so fast and quick, and I don't just if I set myself up and I don't move for 4 hours and the weather stays the same, and I'm just photographing people coming into that space all day long, 4 hours, then I can use it. But I don't do that. I might do it for 10 minutes, but then I move on, and then I want to be amongst it, and I want to go see. I want to be sensitive to what is coming at me, what might come at me. So it doesn't really lend itself that well, but it's always, I've learnt it, and it's always there in the back of my mind. In terms of taking that exposure, I might not have the time to work out all the exact values, but it is informing me all the time. And then it informs me in Lightroom afterwards. But the zone system is largely when you're taking the photograph. And for simplicity's sake, let's say, as I said, we're taking photographs of landscapes. And another thing is, as I said, he did it, Ansel Adams did it with a 5.4 and a medium 4. In a very real way, a zone system is very difficult to implement with 35mm raw film. Because if you've taken 2 or 3 photographs of one thing using the zone system, and then you move on and take another photograph 2 days later or 2 hours later of a completely different scene with different values, it's very difficult to, we'll talk about it later, it's very difficult to have 36 images where you've maybe photographed 18 different subject matters with different tonal values to then control effectively. Very difficult. Much easier with one piece of film, a 5.4 piece of film, or maybe 12 or 9 images on medium format, depending on what your camera is. 12 if it's Hasselblad square format, you get 12 images, 6, 7 fewer, obviously. But that's much easier to control. So you may even bracket and take, 9 images of one image to try and really nail it. The zone system isn't about that. It's about that pre-visualization, and then it's about assessing those tones and creating an exposure that is correct, so that you don't even need to chimp or look at your screen, or exactly what's what because you've crafted it, and that the chemicals that you've used and the film that you've used is going to work in that situation. Now, that all sounds complicated. I'm going to leave that to the end. It's not that complicated at all, but if I throw it in here, it probably will sound a little bit more than we want to talk about. So the zone system itself, let's sort of delve more into that, exactly what it is. It's 11 segments, if you like, 11 stops of grey. Black at one end, which is 0 to 10. At the other end of the spectrum, which is pure white. 0 is black, no detail whatsoever. 10 is pure white, no detail whatsoever. And then increments of another 9 shades of grey, in effect, running through. So black, nearly black, black with some detail, and then split up. 0 to 10. That's not 10 segments, that's 11 segments. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's 11. Yeah, it's not 1 to 10, it's 0 to 10. 5 is the golden number. 5 is mid-grey. Now, it's called 18% grey, reflective light coming off it. Why isn't it 50%? I don't know. I don't care. Google that one. There's plenty of information on there. I've read it, and it's just anorak stuff to me. It's like, it's a middle grey. That's all I need to know. I don't need to, I'm not writing a thesis on it. It's middle for diddle. Nice and simple. Yeah? Just don't complicate things where they don't need to be complicated any further. We are trying to look at a scene, a landscape, bright skies maybe, dark rock, underneath the rock black, so no detail perhaps, maybe some, who knows, but we're squinting a little bit, and then we're seeing that simplified version, what's bright, what's dark, yeah? And then we are applying this zone system in our minds, or on a piece of paper, or on a spot meter, for example. And that's, remember, I mentioned those 3 things with the zone system. The zone system itself, spot meter, pre-visualization. not in that order. So a spot meter, I would argue you probably need a spot meter if you're going to take this seriously, as opposed to just you sitting down with a cup of coffee and you're interested. If you want to do it seriously, you need a spot meter. Now, spot meters are, you've got spot meters in your camera probably. Most cameras have today, and they're exactly the same. They are based on middle grey. Okay, middle grey. That's so. But what a spot meter does is it does a 1 degree point and shoot, if you like. Very, very accurate. It'll hit the smallest of things, and you can get a direct reading off that. And you might want to do it for a highlight and a mid-tone and a shadow area. You might not. Some people just take one reading and go with that. Now, an important thing to say is that film, black and white film, negative film, is amazing and very forgiving, has a lot of latitude as long as you overexpose it. But we don't really want to overexpose our film. We want an accurate, good exposure if we can. But we also must remember that it's probably a good idea in most situations not to underexpose. Now, I'm a complete hypocrite because in my photography, I underexpose 2 stops pretty regularly. But let's move that aside because we're talking just about the zone system here, and that's what I want to try and get over. Like if you use slide film, color transparency film, where everything, you get the sheet of film back and all the images are positive. Now that's very, very difficult film to expect. You have to be precise. And not only that, you have to, I would argue that's where a zone system really comes in handy, because dark areas can look very dense very easily, and you can blur your highlights very easily. So it really is about, this zone system, if you Google it, you get those, I've shown you, pulled up here. I always think of it as like a snooker scoreboard or something. Those toggles that you get that keep score, those sliders. I almost sort of want to put one of those on one, and you can sort of move that toggle to ascertain the best exposure. All right, so spot meter, Pentax do them, Minolta do them, Sekonic do them. I always think the sort of gun-shaped ones are better rather than the sort of analog ones are better than the handheld digital meter things, because the readouts are far easier to interpret than. Anyway, that's just my preference. Sort of slightly more old school, because I just think they're far simpler. But they will give you, in essence, an EV reading, which is just a number that you go by that then pertains to an f-stop and a number. Now, it's very important to remember, this is, if you're writing notes, underline this or spell it out in capitals. A spot meter is, they're normally very, very accurate. However, they're stupid as well. They're very, very limited in the sense that it'll turn everything to grey, to that mid-grey. It tells you how much light is coming off that rock or that tree or that hill or the sky. It wants to turn everything to grey. So, for example, if maybe there's a big boulder in my landscape photograph and it's a dark grey, which normally, if we looked at a zone, we would say is probably 2/3 on the scale. When I point my spot meter at it and take a reading, it's assuming I just want to take a photograph of that rock, and therefore it wants to expose that rock in mid-grade terms. So it will kind of overexpose it to give it the most detail. But that rock within that scene of the landscape is not going to be like that. It is going to be one of the darker areas, because it is. And so if we just expose for that rock, guess what? All our highlights, all our sky is probably going to blow to smithereens. It's all going to overexpose to white. So no point in doing that. But there is a point in taking a reading for it, because this is a shadow area. This is a dark area. This is, as we say, 2, 3, maybe 4, depending on the rock and what have you. But it's on the darker side. Yeah, it's not sky on the lighter side. So we have an understanding of what that EV number is, or what that reading is, depending on your spot meter. And it's maybe saying at f11 that rock is, let's say, I don't know, let's say a second, just to keep it simple. Okay, a second exposure. That's quite a long exposure, yeah, because it's dark. We know that actually, if we do that, that rock is going to lighten up more than we need it to do. So we're going to park it at, we're going to say, okay, I'm just going to keep things simple for the time being. F11, 1 second. Now let's do a meter reading at the sky. And guess what? It's saying at F11, mate, that's 1,000th of a second. 1/1000th of a second. That's, yeah. Again, I'm trying to turn that sky grey. My spot meter is telling me that's, you only just want to photograph the sky, don't you? You're not interested in the, because I put that one tiny little point, that red dot on the sky, it just assumes that I'm just photographing that sky. It doesn't understand the bigger picture. Literally, the bigger picture, pardon the pun. But it just sees what it's pointing at. That specific item within that scene, that landscape. So it's saying 1,000th of a second. So, oh, okay, at f11, so f11 is constant. That's what our aperture is. We've got quite a differential here going on. Yeah, 1 second to 1/1000th of a second. Oh my God, jeepers. All right, let's not fret. But I promise you, Ansel Adams would have rocked up numerous times and thought, oh, how am I going to handle this? Hence the zone system. It's a way of understanding values and then saying, actually, look, the sky is important to me. I'm gonna put, let's carry on. So we've done the sky, we've done the rock. Now we're looking for a mid-tone. What's a mid-tone? Maybe there's some, let's say there's some grass somewhere in that scene. Okay, there's a hill full of grass or whatever. That looks like a mid-tone to me. That looks 5, zone 5. Okay. So we've zone 5 for the grass. So we've maybe allotted the sky to 9. It's very bright. It's on that other edge of the scale. Yeah, not zone 2 or 3 like the granite rock. It's bright, but there's detail in there. Okay, but all the time remembering that our brain is interpreting far more intelligently. Our brain and our eye sees far more than a piece of film can ever see. It's far more intelligent. It's far more able to ascertain certain things that a lens and a piece of film with silver halide cannot. But we're mindful of that. That's fine. So we've got 1,000th of a second in the sky. We've got, let's say, for our grass is saying half a second just for simplicity's sake, it probably wouldn't. Well, it could say that depending on the day and how hot it is and how warm it is and all that kind of stuff. So we've got everything from 1,000th of a second to 1 second at the dark granite, the dark side of the zone system, 2 to 3. So we look at the zone system, or we see the zone system, and we're kind of going, okay, there's, if 2 is the granite and 9 is the sky, because it is fairly bright, but there is some detail in there, we have got a difference. We've got an 8-stop difference, which is going to be quite contrasty. All right, but what shutter speed are we going to go for? We're going to go for 5, which is the grass. Probably, not necessarily, probably going to go for the grass, which will give us a reading of half a second, let's say. But maybe we think that's a little bit too much. Maybe we think that's a little bit too much, and we're very mindful of that sky going over, and we want to protect that. Now, Ansel Adams said you expose your film for the shadow areas, i.e. you meter for the shadow areas, and then develop for the highlights. And there's a lot to be said for that. I, in fact, do the exact opposite. That's just me. That's another thing. I'm trying to talk about the zone system as per Ansel Adams, but as per, so that you can understand it, and then, if you want to do what I do, you can move off from there, but knowing that you have a very stable understanding of tones and tonal ranges and exposure and the zone system. Don't move off otherwise, I think when, people curse the zone system, it's because they change too many things too quickly. Mustn't do it. Initially, when you're starting out, make notes as to what you've done, what your exposure was, what your developer was, what film you've used, and look at what you've done. And then change one thing and one thing only. If you want to change, I don't know, the developer that you're using, change the developer. Don't change the developer and something else. Maybe shorten the time. Because shortening the time will give us more detail in the highlight areas. If you give it longer than the box time, development time, the time that Kodak or Ilford are giving you, it'll make it more contrasty. You'll lose detail. So you have to keep these things in mind, but just do one thing at a time. Be patient initially and arrive at a place where you're getting what you want. Don't just end up with something that's satisfactory, necessarily, unless satisfactory is okay. If you're getting, some nice even tones, that's cool. Nothing wrong with that. But if you want something, that pre-visualization, when I was 18, I promise you, if I showed you some images back when I was 18, they were gritty. Okay, they resembled my angst with the world and my, hormones and all that kind of stuff. They were very gritty, aggressive images. No doubt about it. I can look at them now and think, well, but they represented what I was feeling back then. A lot of grain, quite punchy, quite contrasty. And as time has gone on, I still have that, but less so. It's more, it's not quite as aggressive, not quite as angry, hopefully. And I sort of print or I process or I, photograph how I see now. And that, Ansel Adams was the same. First to admit, it changed throughout his life. His whole way of doing things, not the entirety, the basics were the same, but how to then manipulate, having a very safe platform, like the zone system, having a very safe platform, you can then move off into different directions. and and begin to see the world the way you want to see it, the way you're feeling, the way you want to express it. I know that might sound all arty-farty, fairy stuff. It's, photography is an expression, or in my opinion, it should be an expression. Yes, there are times when it should be just a precise thing. In professional terms, you have photographers who actually are not very good at seeing at all or visualizing, but they're very safe. They just apply a very a set technique, and that, 100 times out of 100 gives the client what they want. Everything is safe. It's good for reproduction. End of story. It doesn't need a great deal of zazz and advertising, commercial photography. Maybe advertising's of a lot more, got a lot more to it than an editorial or not an editorial, but a pack shot, for example, just a still life of something. So it's if it's an art form, which is what I think the club back then, the Ansel Adams Club back then, were off the back of Steichen and Stieglitz. That's what I think they were aiming to be. Taking the art form, they got into a bit of trouble because they called it a pure art form. And to my mind, it was, even if Ansel Adams... I learned dodging and burning from Ansel Adams. Most people thought, oh, he's got his negative so perfect using the zone system, he won't need to dodge and burn. Absolutely not. It wasn't a surprise when I saw his image. It's like, you can't get what he gets in a negative. I would argue that what he gets in his print is much easier to arrive at if you've got a good negative, a well-exposed negative, than it is if you've got a poorly exposed negative. And it's also very restricting if you've got a poorly exposed negative. But he was dodging and burning all the time. It's but again, it's not just the art of dodging and burning, it's that visualization, how he wanted it to look. It's not cheating. He's not superimposing anything or getting rid of any, removing a tree because it was getting in the way. No. It's just using those skills to bring out the best of what those values that you want to see pronounced or not pronounced or whatever. Equally with the chemicals he used, the developers, and the selenium, not sepia, selenium, with a wash aid, 2 fixes. Don't use that. Don't put it in that selenium for too long. It'll send those blacks purple and look quite unpleasant. But just the right amount at the right temperature. You've never seen blacks look more sumptuous on Ilford Gallery paper than... They are sublime. I mean, absolutely. So it was a combination of things, a combination of little tweaks. The whites, it would clear out stuff. It would, gallery paper without selenium, I think, is a little bit green. It's got gorgeous, gorgeous, sumptuous tonal range. And look, I'm digressing a little bit, but this was the Ansel Adams way, and it's all there in his books. That's what I studied. Right? That's what I learned. If Ansel Adams had told me or said that before every photograph he takes, he jogs on the spot for 30 seconds, I would have done it. Sorry. Whatever he's having, I'll have, as far as I'm concerned. I don't mind being the sheep here. His work, even though I'm not that fussed with landscapes, when I bought those books, and I was like, landscape, and I saw the first image, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I mean, and this is just a reproduction. I could not believe what I was looking at. I mean, I couldn't believe you could render such amazing tones. Well, I remember at college, I didn't realise, but people were coming up and looking over my shoulder as I came out of the darkroom with a print. And they started to go, how would you do, they'd come up with their work and ask me how I would print, what they should do with their print. And I was like flabbergasted. It was like, well, I don't know, that's your print. What do you feel you want to do with that print? Yeah, pre-visualization. Everything I feel that, into my image, it's having learnt the Ansel Adams way, it's second nature now. I've practiced it, and yes, I've got better and better. I wasn't very good to begin with, for sure. But, they were seeing stuff that I was happy with, and they were thinking, oh my God, I'm amazing, sort of thing, without me even realizing. But when they asked me what I would do with theirs, I couldn't begin to tell them. I don't know what, I probably didn't even like the image because it was probably of a landscape. It's a very personal thing. I can't tell somebody else what to do. I know exactly what I'm doing, but your image is your image. How did you pre-visualize it? How did you want it to look when it comes out, when it's printed? How do you want it to look? And it's maybe copying people or learning. For me, it was about learning. I applied the Ansel Adams system to my style of photography back then. Yes, I was using the Zone system. I don't use it very much now, but it's never left me. I've never ever, the pre-visualization thing is absolutely there, and so is the tonal. Although I don't stand there with a spot meter and examining every component of that scene, it's still very much there. It is the platform from which I, move from. It is my rock, if you like, the basis from which everything else comes from. The Ansel Adams. I've never really been informed by anybody else. I've liked other photographers, but they haven't, told me what they do in a dark room and what chemicals they use and what papers they use and explained a zone system. That's Ansel Adams. And for me, when I saw those images in those books, even though they were reproductions, they were so powerful, so amazing. I just thought, this is the best printing I've ever seen in my life. And as I said, if you go to a museum and you are lucky enough to see, go. Make sure you go. Even if you don't like landscapes like me. Honestly, I would go tomorrow if I knew there was an Ansel Adams exhibition. I would be there like the shot. I would be the first in the queue. And I'm not even a landscape photographer. Unbelievable. You'll never see anything like it. It's mind-boggling. Even today. I mean, I won't say even today, but today. It's still amazing. I don't think there are many photographers that will say they are Ansel Adams standard. They might do if they're they have an inflated, idea of themselves, but he is right up there in terms of technical ability. Now, that brings me to the second chapter. Okay, the last leg of this vlog. We've touched on the zone system and analysing your image and seeing what you want to protect. Maybe you want to protect the highlights, maybe you want to protect the shadows, depending on the scene. If it's a landscape, you probably want to make sure your highlights don't blow. You probably want to take those readings and work out what is a 5, where to put the 5, based on your spot meter, realising that the spot meter is only trying to turn that highlight or that shadow into a correctly exposed image, based on the fact that it thinks you just want to photograph that boulder or that sky. It doesn't understand that it's part of a scene. You're just collating information for you to interpret. Massive, massive word. Again, if you're making notes, interpret. Capital letters, underlined several times, exclamation marks. It's your interpretation. Huge, huge thing. So I could see mid-grey in something. you might see it as something completely different. How do I know what you can see? I mean, we have to assume that we all seem pretty much the same. But if you're colorblind or what, how does that affect? I don't know. And and when you see a bright scene, maybe you've got more sensitive eyes than other people. Maybe that bright sky does look very white. You don't see the detail. I don't know. I can only interpret it as I see it. As I see it. I can't interpret it as you see it. And so, but let's assume that everybody does see in exactly the same way. Let's, because we have to. There's no point in, we have to have a method. Doesn't matter how creative we want to go in other directions. It starts from a method, and this is the best tried and tested method, as far as I know, and as far as I need to know. You have to work out what 5 is. You have to work out what you want to protect. What you don't want to blow out. And there's a trade-off. So you may want to shift down. You may want to shift up. Be mindful of that. See it. Understand it. What is that meter telling us? Understand that it's averaging for a mid-grey, and then base it on one of the tones on the scale. And if you need to move it down based on the fact that the shadows aren't that important to you, maybe they are. Maybe you want to up it a little bit. You can. It's like that slider I mentioned. It's not fixed. You can move it slightly based on what is important to you. And that is the zone system in essence. Now, there's a massive component, and it's to do with pre-visualization. I think, there's something called the chimp paradox, which is the rational mind versus the animal brain. And for me, photography is all about recognizing that the chimp brain, if you want, the animal brain, which is brilliant in many ways, but it's also very reckless. There are books on this, and I've sort of brought it over into photography. It can be quite brilliant at times. It can save our lives. It can, do all sorts of wonderful things. But it can also get us into deep trouble, deep trouble, if we're not careful, if we're not mindful, if we don't use the intelligent brain, what we've learnt, and inform the chimp brain, that that brilliant but potentially very dangerous chimp brain. It's a combination of both. It's you can take the most technically perfect image, but it'd be utterly boring. Okay? If you allow your chimp brain in a little bit, if you allow your expression, your emotion to resonate, then, for me, for great photography is a combination, always a combination, a trade-off, if you will, of technical know-how. I won't say excellence because that sounds a bit elitist, but good technical know-how and an aesthetic, an emotional reaction to something, or something that resonates very strongly with you. It may not come over in leaps and bounds in the photograph necessarily, but it has caused you to want to set up sticks and carry 12 kilograms or 20 kilos of luggage up a hill, or whatever. I'm exaggerating slightly to demonstrate the point, but make sure you do not deny your chimp brain, because I think as long as that chimp brain is well informed, and you have that combination of learnt and experienced behaviour, or things that you've acquired, things that you've learnt, things that you've sat down and read about, things that you've been to college and experienced and what have you, or not, as the case may be, as long as you combine the technical with the aesthetic, the emotional. I think that's just the greatest combination. And that, I think, is part of the pre-visualization and being aware of it. And it's almost more important than the zone system, dare I say that, because the zone system is just a method. It's just 11 grades of grey and black and white at the end, and you just have to see what's in your image, break it down, be quite technical about it, monitor it or shoot it with a spot meter, see what you've got, and then kind of, yeah. No, want to go that, you know. So you're informing yourself, you're interpreting what that light meter is giving you, bearing in mind that it's just an average. It's an average. It's not an average. It's giving you a medium grey. It's trying to turn whatever you photograph, the brightest sun in the world, it will try and reduce down to a medium grey, even though it's, you know, probably going to burst the cells on your meter because it's so bright. Equally, it will do the same with a black rock or a very dark rock. It will try and lighten it for you to bring it about to a medium grey, a medium kind of exposure, a good exposure, whatever that, you know, whatever that is, you know. And that's key as well. You know, if you look at, you know, people will interpret the zone system in their own way, but the key thing is understanding it and then moving off. You know, that's why it's potentially difficult or complicated, because there are so many different people who understand the zone system but choose to go their own way with what they're doing. And good luck to them, I say. You can look at any photographer you want on the planet, and they all have a slightly different way of working. And that way of working will probably change as they get older. So the last thing, I mean, it's part and parcel of this. It is the very last thing I've just remembered. Do I talk about? Yes, I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Mindful that this is dragging on somewhat. If we embrace this system and we get really good at it, or not we get good at it, but we get so far along the way with it, and we're getting results, and we're beginning to understand it, and it's, you know, no different to a musician, you know, interpreting a score of music. I think Ansel Adams actually said the negative is the score, and the print is the performance. But it's no different to interpreting a score of music. You can thrash it out and make it sound loud and aggressive, or you can make it sound quite melodic and whatever. It's, you know, tempo and everything else. It's exactly the same thing. But there are things such as, so if you're shooting with a 35mm camera, for example, you know, Japanese lenses are typically, or were back in the 70s, for example, were typically more contrasty than German lenses. That added on to 30 second, you know, a minute extra in the developing tank can really change how many highlights are captured in your print. So, you know, just as agitation, you know, some people do that in the tank, twist the stick. Some people are, thank you very much, I'll do that. You know, tons of developer pouring, racing through. You know, it makes a big difference. It makes a difference, okay? And when you combine all these little things, you know, the times, the agitation, the developer you use, how long you use it for, the developer in combination with the film that you're using. You know, I can make HP5, my favourite film, look ugly as sin. Very easily. I can make it look sumptuous as well. I would argue I can do this exactly the same thing with Tri-X or Delta or whatever else. So there are these variances that you will come up with, you will find, hopefully. It's like the Holy Grail almost, but bear in mind, as I said earlier, change one thing at a time. Don't change loads of things, otherwise you will not know where you are. You'll get change, but you won't know what has changed and why it's changed and what is responsible for changing that, or by how much. You have to do it incrementally, and you also have to be precise about what you're doing initially, because, well, no, not initially always, but that being precise will become second nature. So it's not like, you're scrutinizing everything. In the beginning, yes, and do things incrementally, and then you will learn so much more than me rabbiting on, read the Ansel Adams books, because in layman's terms, they're really understandable, really reader friendly, and you will get so much great information from that, and you'll have a concept, an understanding of what light is. I talked about the Sunny 16 rule in my previous vlog. It's exactly the same thing. It's about understanding, what's light, what's dark, what's mid grey, what's going to be my aperture at that given. How can I shoot manually all the time without a meter? That kind of thing. It's very similar, but it's also very it's also the exact opposite in a way, because you're working without a meter. Whereas with this system, I would argue, initially anyway, you need a spot meter. It's a very good investment. You'll always have it. They're very good. They're very accurate, but they're also very stupid. So just bear that in mind. Understand the limitations of them, but know that you'll get an exact reading of mid-grey. Okay. So I think that's probably enough. I have, it's almost too big a subject to talk about in real terms. So again, I will say, for that reason, if I've missed anything out, which I have, I've missed out loads of stuff. I can't talk about everything. I'd be here. I could talk about it for a week. Literally, I could talk about it for a long, long time and still not cover everything. But if there are certain things that you want to know that you don't understand, or I've missed out, or whatever, ask questions and I will endeavour to do my best to come back to you, because it is such an important thing, and it's actually a really, really pleasurable thing to implement and to understand and use when you can. I said I don't use it very often now, but I use it when I can. I use it when it works for me every single time. It's just not very often, but that's just because of the nature of what I do and how I do it. It doesn't mean I don't agree with it, and as I say, everything is informed by that. That's, I learnt that right from the beginning. I'm really pleased I did. With hindsight, I'm so pleased college said, read these 3 books. The best thing they ever did, probably. So I'm going to pass that one on. They're still in print for a very good reason, because all around the world, even Lightroom is probably modelled on it. In essence, it's about understanding tones and where to, how to get a good exposure based on what you have in any given scene, whether it be a landscape or not. You can apply it to any kind of photography. I would argue that's probably easier to do if you've got your camera tripod, where you've got time to consider certain things. If you can, wow, fill your boots. You'll be glad you did. Thanks very much for stopping by again, and I hope that was helpful in some way. Somebody asked me to do this. They're either going to love me or hate me after this. But this one's for you. You know who you are. I'm not going to mention names. So, yeah. Thanks a lot. See you for the next one.